Hello, everyone. Due to the number of people on this Zoom meeting, we're going to go ahead and keep everybody muted. As we go through, if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat function. I'm Candy Slobodnik, Midwest Underwriting Counsel for Agents. I'm going to be manning the chat, and as Elizabeth's going through, I will mention questions as they're coming up, and then we'll touch on some questions at the end. If there's anything state specific that you might have, we might wait and send those to your individual underwriters so that they can better respond to your specific questions. With this webinar, we sent out a handout. It's a nice trusty booklet that we've made for the RON process. Elizabeth's going to go through that, but make sure that you've printed that, you have that for reference, because we took some time to really detail it out and try to walk you through this process. Tomorrow at the same time, we're going to be having a roundtable. It'll be Elizabeth and I, and also
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
Okay, sorry. Went ahead and muted that person, so we won't hear that now. So if anybody else starts talking, I'll just make sure to go back and mute them. Tomorrow's roundtable is with Elizabeth and I, Cheryl Coward, who is our senior underwriting counsel, and then Kevin Thomas out of Florida. So today we're going to be talking a lot more about RON. Tomorrow it's what are we doing if you're not using that remote online notarization. It's going to be a lot more roundtable discussion where we'll have some key points, but all of us underwriters will be kind of chiming in what we're seeing in the region and how you can go forward under these new constraints that we have. So feel free to register, sign in for tomorrow. And at this time, I will turn it over to Elizabeth.
All right, thank you, Candy, and thank you for everyone joining us today to talk about remote online notarization and the changes that we're seeing right now. I want to set some goals to start us out today. First, we're going to talk about setting expectations for you, your company, with lenders, and for the consumer. We're also going to review some decisions and processes that you need to go through and work on in order to do a full digital closing. We're going to review a couple different types of digital closings together. And then we're going to also talk about action plans, what you can do today, what you can do tomorrow, and maybe next week. The last thing that we're going to do is also review the actual bulletin highlights that Agents National issued, I believe, 2 weeks ago now. Interestingly, if you read the Fannie and Freddie Guidelines that came out just yesterday, there's a lot of similarities. So let's go ahead and just get started here. All right, so we have been hearing for 4 years. We draft legislation in Indiana at least 4 years, and in other states 4 to 5 years ago. RON is great, RON is good, let's go now, let's just do it. But everyone, I want you to just take a pause for a second, because RON is not FaceTime. RON is not Skype. When we are talking about remote online notarization that protects the consumer, that protects the lender to be able to foreclose in the future, there are a lot of different items that have to be completed in order to protect the lender and the consumer. In the current environment that we're in, we also can't do remote online notarization for every single transaction. The reality that we are in today is a lot of our lender partners aren't quite ready for an e-note or an e-mortgage. Now, what is an e-note or an e-mortgage? What I want everyone to understand is we put an E on everything. That was the concept. For lenders and mortgage companies, they have a lot of processes that we're going to review that they need to do in order to be able to do an e-note that is then able to be sold on the secondary market. Now, with that being said, I don't want you all to hang up at this point and say, well, we can't do RON. we're going to talk about some situations where we believe that you could do wrong. And this is definitely coming as more lenders work and are working right now to be able to produce an e-note that can go through a full round transaction. So, all right. Other things that we need to think about is just a general, we're in a crisis right now. We can do these e-processes, we could do it quickly, but we also need to think about beyond right now. We do have a crisis, but we have to think beyond that crisis. There are technologies, again, and that is what we're going to be talking about tomorrow, even more, that could be implemented so that you are still protecting people as much as possible. Okay. And this is where I'm going to start, the PowerPoint. All right, we all need to remember, and this is hard right now, we're still in the business of providing peace of mind to our lenders and consumers that your transaction was handled professionally and securely. That's hard right now with all of the information that is coming at us daily that is changing. So if you ever have questions, always contact your underwriter. Now, let's talk about this. Decisions and processes that are required for a full digital closing. Now, to talk about digital closings, please understand, we're not just talking about necessarily a remote online notarization. We're also talking about in-person electronic notarization. I want to go over a few terms that are on the left-hand side of this slide.
Elizabeth, are you meaning to show your PowerPoint? Because we cannot see it.
Oh no, yes.
So it showed up and then it went away. So I don't know if you could re-show it.
There we go.
Yes, I can.
Better?
Yeah.
Thank you, Candy. All right, so decisions and processes required for full digital closings. Again, I'm going to go over some of the items listed on the left-hand side. An e-signature, what is that? Again, we just put an E on the front of it. It's a signature that uses technology. That can be done in person or via RON. So those are the two terms you see below the e-signature. RON, remote online notarization. That's similar to what we're doing right now. No one that is on this call right now and watching this video is actually with me. They are completely remote. That is different from the term below, the in-person electronic notarization. In person, you can touch the person. So if Candy was right next to me, that's an in-person electronic notarization. Can I actually touch the person that is the signer whose signature I am notarizing? E-recording, this is a more common term that we're used to seeing. We've had e-recording for a long time, but in order to have a full digital closing, we have to be able to e-record. And that is one of the considerations that you have to think about when we're talking about the decisions and processes required for a full digital closing. For that transaction, do I have the ability to do an e-sign? Do I have the ability to either do a remote notarization or an in-person notarization? And then the last step is it has to be e-recorded. If you are currently primarily in a county that does not have e-recording, it's going to be really hard and potentially impossible to do a full digital closing. The exception, and this is in a bulletin, is if you are in one of the states that has the ability to paper out. You will want to check your state laws to see if you can do that. Papering out means simply we do the full e-closing, the full digital closing, and you're actually able to print those documents. Many states don't have this, and this is the exception generally. So going back, these are decisions that we in the title industry have to look at and make in order to do a full digital closing. What I'm going to do is show you and talk about what our lender partners have to do in order to do a full digital closing and be a part of this. And this is where we have the issue and why we can't automatically jump into remote online notarization. All right, so we had our one column, and then we just expanded all the way to the right. So these are the processes that our lender partners have to think about in order to do a full run. So we have the lender. Who are we getting the e-note and e-mortgage from? They are going to be worried about being able to e-sign, going to the closing table. Then they have these terms, the e-note, the e-vault, and the mayor's registry. Okay, let's go through those real quick. The e-note is like a promissory note that we're used to, but with an e-note, there is specific language that needs to be in there. There is the ability to sign it electronically, not a wet signature, which is what we are used to. And then it has these other wonderful capabilities that allow it to be put into the e-vault. Now let's think about what the e-vault is. Normally when we sign a paper promissory note, what happens? We send it to the lender, or if they do it, they keep it, and they keep it somewhere. That's what the e-vault is. It is where the e-note is kept. Now, what also occurs with an e-note is within 24 hours of the closing on an e-note, it is put onto the mayor's registry. Everyone remembers mayors generally from 10 years ago and what they did with it to watch it and see what happened. The mayor's e-registry is where they put the note, who is holding it, what is going on, where it is. So these three things have to be considered by our lenders in order to even think about doing an e-note, an e-vault, or to do a digital closing. Now, here's the next question they have to have. Most of our lenders are actually obtaining the money from a warehouse lender or working with a warehouse lender somehow. Same questions for that warehouse lender. Where are they on the issue of e-note, the e-vault, the mayor's registry? Same thing for investors. When these are repackaged and other folks are investing in these mortgages, are they willing to accept an e-note, e-vault, mayor's registry? Are they ready for this? Same thing for custodians and servicers. Everyone on the lender side, and there's many parts, have to be willing and able and capable of handling an e-note, e-vault, and the mayor's registry and having that set up. So that's why there's a lot that has to be done by our lender partners who are working to do this right now. Now the question always is anyone ready? Yes, there are lenders out there that are doing full remote online notary digital closings today. So that is where you need to talk with your lender partners. All right, so I am a lawyer. I could talk about how we got to digital closings all day long for 3 hours, 5 hours, whatever. We're not going to do that. I'm going to give you the landscape here relatively quickly on where we are with full digital closing acceptance. In the federal landscape, we have had e-sign and UITA for approximately 20 years. So e-sign was the federal, UITA are the state laws that are put in place to just do the e-sign. What we are looking at on the federal side for being able to do remote transactions, so remote online notarization, is the proposed Secured Act of 2020. You may have seen information on this coming from Alta. This has recently been introduced on Capitol Hill in response to the COVID-19 crisis. I don't know right now where it is and where it stands, but if this does get passed, there is the potential for having remote online notarization in every state in the United States. With that being said, always you will want to check with any future agents' national bulletins on whether your state can in fact rely on the Secure Act of 2020. Where is Ron in state law? Currently, there's states, or there is statutes and regulations in about 23 states. We are tracking the emergency orders that are occurring now on a daily basis with remote online notarization. You will want to ask us if your state is not listed currently on our bulletin whether you can perform RON given the guidelines provided by your state. In-person electronic notarization. There is no federal law on this. There are state laws and regulations in place. Finally, in order to get to, again, recording, we have your para. That is just e-recording. Right now in the United States, approximately 2,000 counties, or 85% of the population, have state laws and regulations in place for e-recording. So we do have a lot of our people covered in order to do a digital closing and be able to record. All right, let's talk about our lender partners. So this literally changed overnight with Fannie and Freddie just a little bit. And we're gonna go into those guidelines here in a moment. The secondary market is important because our lenders that are doing the initial funding and lending generally sell these mortgages in a lot of cases to the secondary market. So we're talking about Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and Ginnie Mae. They had previously issued guidance, Fannie and Freddie, on the partial acceptance of remote online notarization and IPEN and what their parameters were. Yesterday, approximately 4 o'clock, Candy, we received new information from Fannie and Freddie on what they would like to do. Now, this is only Fannie and Freddie. Please realize if you are dealing with a loan that would be handled later by Ginnie Mae, they have not issued guidance yet on remote online notarization. So that's where it's really important to work with your lender to know if the loan type that is being worked on can have a RON conducted. All right, so these were the guidelines that we received yesterday from both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. These guidelines are actually available at these websites listed at the top. What I have gone ahead and done, on this page, I have the information that both Fannie and Freddie agree upon. And on the next page, we're gonna see a couple little differences. Please note that these guidelines, much like the Agents National Bulletin that has been issued, are temporary. Both Fannie and Freddie have indicated that these are for applications that have been received by May 17th, 2020. Fannie specifically said, and for applications that are currently in the pipeline. Freddie didn't say that, but they did say if they are in the pipeline, we really suggest using these guidelines for these current loans if you can. So what are the things that Freddie and Fannie have in common? And what we're going to do too is, as I go through this, I'm going to explain what they're talking about. Fannie and Freddie have issued these guidelines, and they also, in your handbook, I have a lot of Fannie definitions starting on page 13, and then other definitions from the MBA Alta Model Act for Remote Online Notarization. So both include 43 states that Fannie and Freddie have approved for remote online notarization in response to the COVID-19 outbreak. There must be two-factor authentication. What is meant by that? So originally, when RON and the concept remote online notarization came up, the idea was, oh, you just hold up your ID to the camera like I'm doing now, and that's how we look at it. No, that's not what the laws actually say that are in many states. The requirements by Fannie and Freddie match a lot of the MBA Alta requirements, RULONA requirements of presenting and scanning, having the person that is signing the document present and scan their government ID that contains a signature. Now, what happens with that? that is credential analysis. When it's kind of like if you've been to the airport lately and TSA scans your ID, they're doing a couple of things when that happens. With credential analysis, with a lot of our vendors right now for remote online notarization, they're taking that ID and making sure that it looks like the ID should. So for Indiana, it would have Indiana in blue, my picture would be on the left, it would have my address, that sort of information. Does it look correct as to what that state usually issues? For same thing for a passport. Does it have the usual information that is in a passport? Does it look right? Now, what is important to understand with credential analysis, we're not actually checking the contents yet. There is technology being worked on by the vendors in order to compare the information in the ID to what is in the public record, but that is not necessarily being done now. It's just looking at the ID, does it fit what it should look like? The next authentication procedure that is used is identity proofing. Identity proofing is done online, and what that is where using the credit report or other public-private, really private information, the signer whose signature is being notarized actually goes through a list of questions that are hard to answer. We're not talking about something you might have answered on Facebook. Hopefully you're not putting the last 5 places you lived or the telephone numbers for the last 5 numbers that you had, because that is the type of information that is being asked. These are the harder questions that someone would really have to hopefully know that person or really be that person. If it was my husband, he should be able to answer these, but it really should be me, the only person. And that's what identity proofing is. So Fannie and Freddie want it to be the full run. We're not talking FaceTime. We're not talking Skype. We're actually making sure that the person who signs the document is in fact that person. Another requirement by Fannie and Freddie is tamper sealing of the document. This is a technology item where you sign it, the information's in it, because remember, we're not in paper. We get it done, and at the end, this tamper seal is put in place. What that tamper seal does is for the recorders, for us, for the lenders, if someone changes that document, we get a red flag on it that says, hey, this document has been tampered with and changed. It is not the original. Why is that important? It's just like with a regular note and mortgage. If the note is signed, we don't want that changed in the future. If the mortgage is signed, we can't go in and change the mortgage. Again, we put an E on it, but we didn't change the overall thought process. We want to make sure that the note is the original, that the mortgage is the original. Other guidelines include the electronic journal and including the identity of a person. So with the electronic journal, again, that is a requirement that is found in RULONA and the MBA Alta Model Acts. Remote online notaries have to generally, or always have to keep an electronic journal that also includes the identity of the person whose notarization they just took. Another requirement is when we're doing these remote online notarizations, you have to be able to keep a recording of the video per state law, or if there is no law, for 7 years. That is important because we're not in the face-to-face in-person scenario. If there was a situation where someone came forward and said, that wasn't me, isn't it going to be handy if we have a video of that person that we've kept to again show that person, no, that was you that actually signed that mortgage. The last, couple of the last requirements, again, re-emphasizing this point, you've got to be able to e-record the e-document. So again, in certain counties, we're not going to be able to do this. In other counties, we will. One point, lenders can't require a person to do remote online notarization. That was made clear in both of the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac guidelines. And that's important to talk about with our lender partners as we're working on this, because everyone is scared right now. Everyone is worried about the coronavirus, but at the same time, our lender partners can't force the consumer to conduct a RON. Okay. Where are they different? So for Freddie Mac in their bulletin, it specifically states that a title insurance policy cannot have an exception put in place for using RON. So for us as underwriters, we're either accepting it and doing RON or we're not. We can't put an exception in the policy if it's a Freddie Mac loan. Another item that you will see in those bulletins is the signature must be logically associated with the document. That's using the ones and zeros that are in computers to say that signature that was placed by the signer that did it electronically, there's a pathway to the actual document. They link up and that information all flows together. Another one, and this is in the Agents National Bulletin, and this is important. Everyone to the transaction needs to consent to any part of the transaction being done by remote online notary or technology. We don't want a buyer or borrower in the future to say, I didn't consent to that mortgage, so therefore I shouldn't be foreclosed upon, right? We want everyone to acknowledge what they're doing and acknowledge this is new technology so that we don't have to fight that issue. Again, we want that mortgage, just like in regular times, to be enforceable. If we have consents along with the actual e-sign mortgage, that's going to help it be enforceable. With Freddie Mac, it also states if you're using an out-of-state notary, there must be interstate recognition. What does that mean? So I'm just going to use an example. If I'm sitting here in Indiana and say I don't have my remote online notary, I'm not one. I really am not. If I want to use a Florida notary, can I do that? Well, if we have interstate recognition and the Secretary of State and our laws say that in Indiana you may use a Florida notary, we're okay. That's really a question that's case by case. And please, if you have questions, consult with your Agents National underwriter to discuss whether you have a situation where RON can be used for interstate recognition. Now, Fannie Mae specifically states when it comes to this issue, the notary public has to be licensed and physically located in the state where the notarial act occurred and where required by law or regulation is specifically licensed to perform a remote online notarization. What does that mean? What they are asking is if I am an Indiana notary and I'm doing a remote online notarization, I need to be in Indiana when I do that. There have been situations in the past where some companies had notaries that said they were licensed in a particular state, but were conducting the notarization in a different state. So, as an Indiana, if I'm saying I'm a remote online notary, I need to be in Indiana when I am doing that transaction. That is a Fannie Mae requirement. All right, this is what I want to really hit right now for everyone. There's a lot that we're going to go over in order to get you from A to Z with remote online notarization setup and process. But this is what I need to remind myself is that a little bit of progress every day will add up to big results. This isn't going to be something that you just turn on the faucet and using our phone and FaceTime and here we go. There are steps, but I'm telling you, you can do it. And we're here to help you at Agents National. So I'm going to turn this off and actually use and talk to you guys. All right, so everyone, if you could pull out your practical tools and considerations for digital closings. I'm actually going to use this and talk us through these things you need to do. The first place that we're going to go is actually the Ron Readiness Checklist, which begins on page 5. Candy, Cheryl, and I, and Mickey and Kevin looked at all of this to say, how do we actually get people set up? What do they actually need to do? So there's 5 things that you really need to think about in order to start this process. 1, make a plan. 2, choose a remote online notary vendor. 3, get started potentially using a cash-only or seller-only side transaction. 4, get started with your lenders. And 5, work through the process with your lenders using our lender questionnaire. So step 1 in making a plan, and on anything very new or technologically difficult or engaging, who's going to be your person at your office that takes the lead on this? This is important because there's a lot of steps and there's a lot of workflows that need to be designed in order to process a remote online notarization. For example, it's a little bit different, a RON is, or a digital closing, than our traditional closings, because on a traditional closing, we have a lot that occurs on the back end. With a RON or a digital closing, what we are doing is we are getting the package in earlier, tagging all the documents, and getting them ready to go into a system. So when we get to the actual closing, we're not thumbing through pieces of paper. We already have it set up so that the actual closing itself is bang, 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 and smooth. We don't want to ever have to re-upload documents in order to do a remote online notarization. So who's going to be your expert? Who's going to design your workflow at your company? It might be an owner manager. It might be a very technologically savvy closer. That's really up to the individual agents. Now I'm going to jump down to just a practical point right now. With the COVID-19 outbreak and what's going on, a lot of people are very interested in conducting remote online notarizations. You really need to go ahead and look at your office and figure out who are going to be my RON notaries. Who are going to be the 2 or 3 people that actually do this? And what you also need to do when thinking about that, get them started in the process with the Secretary of State. But one of the things that is going to be asked almost immediately is, what system are you using? Who is going to be your remote online notarization vendor? Now, to make that determination, here are some suggestions from me. 1, talk to your top 5 lenders. Have they started this process, and who have they picked to say, yeah, we want to use this company. We believe that this company, and we will accept remote online notarizations from them. You've got to have that question. You've got to check in a couple other places for that vendor. Also, did your underwriter, Agents National, for example, did we actually approve using that remote online notary vendor? Currently, we'll go over this in the bulletin, we have 4 approved. So you have to have your lender, you have to have your underwriter. Did your Secretary of State actually approve that vendor? There have been situations in the various states across the 23 that currently have RON laws where the Secretary of State looked at a remote online notarization platform and said, not you. So just because there might be a national company, you want to make sure that they were in fact approved in the state where you are located and where your RON notaries are going to be. All right, the next quick decision that needs to be made, and we'll go over this, it's not going to be terrible, I promise. If you're looking at this video and doing this, it's going to be okay, but is looking at your hardware situation. What do you have, or what do you need to get in order to conduct a RON closing? Now, I want everyone to pick up their pen right now, because this is probably the most important part that gets overlooked on a regular basis. I even wrote it down at the bottom of mine, just so everyone remembers. With remote online notarization, you need to look in on your E&O policy. make sure you have the coverages you need and that you're not going to have exclusions for using computers. I haven't read the opinion, but I just saw my first case come down yesterday. It wasn't in title insurance land. It was in another situation with cybercrime and ransomware. And is there insurance coverage in those situations? This is where we are in the insurance land, but you need to talk with your E&O provider to make sure that you are covered and there's not going to be exception if you conduct remote online notarization at this time. So please write that down and check that out. Now, I'm going to step 2 right now with choosing a vendor. All right, so what are we doing? Like, who do we pick? How do we pick this? Why do we pick this? Okay, I'm going to tell you on the remote online notary bulletin that Agents National issued, those 4 vendors are going to be okay on these requirements. But you want to be able to talk about this also with your lenders so that you can have a conversation with them. A couple of different items that are very important. Does that company actually do your registration for your e-notary certificate and stamp? So again, we stuck an E on something. You're going to actually get an e-notary stamp that is digital. And it will include the information that is required by your specific statute or Secretary of State, and it's digital. Does your vendor do that? Can they do that for you? We also need to make sure, again, for the consent, that the vendor can do the ID verification authentication for all of the parties. Can they do the consent? Everyone wants to be here. Can they make sure that only the parties that are supposed to be there at the closing ceremony are there? If we were in a regular office, we would know who is actually there and have control over who enters that closing room. We've still got NPI considerations, and we want to make sure that the people that are supposed to be there are the only people that are there. Does the platform have video recording and video storage? That's going to be an issue because video storage can be very expensive. The more, we know this, anyone that has an iPhone, those videos take up a lot of space. Same thing is going to happen for remote online notarizations. The more information that is kept on your servers, the more room that is taking up. Again, can this company work with eNotes and eVaults and get those documents registered on the mayor's registry within 24 hours? Those are going to be important questions for your lender partners. Multi-factor authentication, again, making sure all the people are there that should be. And lastly, it has to have the tamper evidence seal. We have to know at the end of the day whether that person actually tampered with the document. Is that the original note? Is it the original mortgage?
One thing that's coming up in the chats quite a bit is making sure when you're meeting or talking to a vendor that if your state requires that the notary physically be located where the property is, that your vendor that you're looking actually has that. So Illinois' order says the notary must be located in Illinois. If that's the case, make sure when you're looking at these different vendors that they actually have notaries available in Illinois. What we're saying though, because we're getting a lot of questions on this, is the requirement is that the notary is licensed where they're actually notarizing. So I'm in Kansas, I can only notarize it in Kansas. I can't go to Texas and use my Kansas notary. We're not saying it has to be Kansas property unless your specific state order is saying it has to be a Kansas notary, Kansas property. Otherwise, we're relying on that full faith and credit clause, the interstate recognition, to be able to allow that Texas notary to be able to notarize something and be able to use it in Kansas. So that's the distinction. Get a lot of questions on it. So just want to make sure we're clear there.
Absolutely. And that's one of those situations when you get to the stage of being actually able to do a RON, that's where you call Candy or I or Mickey or Kevin or Cheryl and say, what about this deal? Is this set up correctly? Is this how I can do this? We can answer that for you. That's what we're here for. That's a more complicated question than our everyday, do I need a survey on this? We can answer that automatically, but that is more complicated. So do feel free to call us. All right. So the last couple of issues that you need to look at are getting started with your lenders. And that's something that can be done. It doesn't have to wait until step 4. Go ahead and take the time right now to reach out to your lenders and see who's ready to do this, who's interested in do this, who can I learn this process with. Some folks are ready to go right now. Reach out, ask them what vendors they're using, ask them what platform they like to use for the process, and talk with them just generally and commiserate. Hey, we're getting started too. Where are we all at? What do we need to do? What can we work on together? The last part is your actual lender questionnaire. I would recommend doing this for every single individual lender and going over with them and walking through what provider are they using, what counties do they want to do digital closings in, what type of transactions are they interested in doing for this, how will the loan package and settlement documents be delivered to the borrower. There's a bunch of questions that you'll want to walk through with your individual lenders in order to determine where you are, how you want it handled, and work out that flow with your actual lenders. One part that is also in this packet, I'm not going to go over, is the education of the consumer. So we talk about we're figuring out how to do all of this. At some point, there's going to be an email, and we're going to go over the process here in a moment, that goes out to the consumer and says, we're ready to go, let's do this closing. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a letter that was sent ahead of time or contemporaneously that explained the process that the consumer is actually going to go through in order to conduct a remote online notarization? They aren't coming into our office when we do this. So this is an opportunity to provide a touch, to provide consumer education so they know what they're doing and are going to be comfortable with the process. This is new for a lot of people, the thought of signing a mortgage online. While we talk about the differences between age groups and whatnot, we have to remember that our consumers are coming at us from different perspectives. Some folks have refied before, so it's no big deal. Some people have bought properties before. It's no big deal. Some people haven't. So we just have to reach out to the consumer and make sure they are ready to go beyond just sign and consent, but actually so they can understand what they need to do in order to close the loan or the transaction. All right. So I'm going to go back to PowerPoint, and I'm going to do it correctly this time. There we go. All right. So in this packet on page 4, there are a bunch of different types of e-closings. We're going to be talking about primarily 2 today, 2 combinations. The first is a hybrid RON. So in that situation, the promissory note is actually going to be wet signed. And that's important because in those situations, if we have a lender that isn't ready for an e-note, maybe they can do a RON where the promissory note gets wet signed. For us in title land, we don't insure the note. That's going to be incumbent upon the lender to get that done and make sure it's done correctly. And you'll really need to work that process out with them. But with the hybrid RON, we're going to go over a wet signed promissory note and a notarized mortgage using remote online notarization. We're also going to walk you through the steps of a full digital closing with RON. Now this can be done with cash, a cash deal. We don't have a lender, it's going to be easier. Or also we're going to go through the full steps with the actual lender. All right. I promise we're only going to do the crazy slide once. So what's the first step that happens? We actually prepare, the title agent prepares a closing package for e-signature and RON. So those are the preliminary steps where you have to tag it and mark it and get it ready to be uploaded into the RON vendor. All right, so the closing, the title agent here sends it to the RON vendor. The RON vendor says, great, I've got a closing package. It's tagged. So the RON vendor then sends a secure email to the signer once the documents are ready. So that's the important step. And that's where we have to educate the consumer to be expecting that email. We're all worried about wire fraud and weird emails being sent to our consumers and bad instructions for wiring. That's why it's very important to communicate ahead of time with the consumer about what they need to do and what they're going to expect so that they are clicking on the right information. So what does a signer do? They actually initiate the run session. They say, hey, I'm here, let's go, let's do it. The first step that happens is the consent to e-sign is completed. Again, that's where the signer and everyone says, yep, let's do Ron. All right. So then what happens is the signer, so the person whose signature is being notarized, presents their government ID. So they're going to have it basically as a scanning function used by the vendor, where they capture also an image of the front and back of that ID. So the question is, did that ID pass? Did it actually match, and did it look like it should have? This is where we have the potential for a hard fail. No, it doesn't match. The Indiana ID actually looks like an Illinois one. That's a hard fail. The run stops. We cannot conduct that closing. There's not a valid ID. It's the same thing as if we were in our office and someone came in with what is obviously a fake ID that someone tried to get into a bar with. Nope, it's a hard fail, we're out. Did it pass? Yes! So here's where we have the different types of authentication. We go through step 2. So this is per Secretary of State laws and regulations generally, through ANTIC, and also now through Fannie and Freddie have told us there has to be the second step. So this could be, and generally is going to be your KBAs, your knowledge-based authentication. That's the test we were talking about that asks very specific questions about a person. So this is our second point where we potentially have a hard fail. MISMO has offered standards, and generally these are good standards. People will be able to take the test a couple of times, but if they fail it the second time, they're going to be done. That's a hard fail. So this is another opportunity to really talk with the consumer about the importance of slowing down at this stage and making sure that they read those questions. I've failed this question before when I was looking for a credit report. So these are difficult questions. They really need to pause and take a moment to look at them and really think about it. Because if they don't pass it, we have a hard fail situation. Again, the RON stops. Now what happens also, if that happens, the RON vendor platform is actually going to send a notification to the title agent. Ruh-roh, we've got a problem, we failed. All right. So at this point, this is when the audio-visual simultaneous actually begins. We're not taping their answers to questions that are private. We don't want that information as title agents. We don't want our RON vendors to have a tape of someone answering very specific questions about NPI. So this is where the actual recording begins. Now, with the RON vendor, what they are doing, they are recording now a continuous synchronized audio and visual field. So even though we can't use Zoom to notarize, it's basically what we're doing right now. The question then always, and throughout this process, was the AV ever interrupted? If it is, we have to restart the initial authentication clear up here. If there's any interruption and say there's a bad internet connection, we're going to go clear back up to this point and start the process all over, because we want to have a continuous stream so that we show a good signing ceremony. All right. So what the notary also receives is notification that the AV is good. If it's not, at that point, it's not necessarily a hard fail. The notary is going to have the opportunity to fix it. If they are ready, yay, we can keep going with this process. So again, the notary is going to check the video, microphone, speakers, and internet connections. Are they good? No, we have the opportunity to fix it again. If they are good, we're actually going to start the signing ceremony. This is what we've been working on to get to. This is important. Again, remember that the information that was sent on the government ID All they were checking is, does it kind of look like it should, or does it match? Now is the opportunity for the notary to actually look at the ID and make sure, Candy said she's going to be here. Oh, does her picture actually look like Candy? I'm doing it right now. Oh, that looks like Candy. That looks like her ID. Good to go. Because this is another hard fail opportunity. So we're validating that they pass their tests and they look like their picture. Great. If they don't, we have another hard fail. So in that situation, the Ron notary lets the title agent know we have a hard fail. We cannot conduct this notarization. Again, it's just E. If someone comes into your office with a bad ID, we're not going to close the deal. Same thing here. We've got a bad ID, someone doesn't look right, we got a bad feeling, we stop. We do not do the Ron closing. All right, at this point, the signer literally is reviewing the documents and electronically signing the closing package while the online notary is with them. So this is the opportunity where the signer can actually ask the individual questions and see what's going on. Then documents requiring notarization are signed and notarization is completed by the notary. So they're affixing their electronic seal and signature, the notary is, and moving on down. Now, what happens with those documents? The Ron vendor is actually going to facilitate compliance with state laws, and they're going to include marking the documents as a remote online notarization. That is very important. That's some of the Fannie and Freddie guidelines, and that's a lot of underwriter guidelines too. We want to know if this was actually done remotely or in person. All right, this is the audit trail. What this happens, so it's like, think of this as like criminal evidence. We always want to know where that piece of evidence is and who had control, who had access, and how we got from A to Z. Your remote online notary vendor will provide that for you. All right. Following the signature, the document, and the audit trail are tamper sealed. Again, we want to make sure they cannot be manipulated. So next step, and this is for a cash hybrid and wet sign note situation. The Ron vendor notifies the parties that the Ron signing is complete. We're done, ta-da! So then what does the title agent do? They record the documents. All right. A separate step, and this is not actually in the ceremony, so that's why there's no arrow. The Ron notary wants to do a couple of things afterwards. They want to ensure the maintenance of their journal and the video recording per the state law. The Ron vendor should be providing safeguards on the notary journal and retaining the AV recording under the direction of the notary. That is in the contracts between the notaries and the vendors. All right. Now, that we were done there with a full, with a cash deal or a seller side only. Let's go ahead and add on a full Ron closing. So in this situation, we have an e-note that we're going to have to handle. The first two flows that we just worked on are the same. Here's what we're going to add is that e-note. So now we're going to have to deal with the e-vault situation. And
well, Elizabeth, you're looking at 5 to 6 more minutes before hour's up. So, okay.
Perfect. I'm going to fly. So in this situation, if there's an e-note, we actually have the signer electronically sign the e-note. Then the Ron vendor registers it with mayors. There's an authoritative copy of the e-note placed in the e-vault. Again, we've got to know where it is so that we can foreclose if we have to. And then we go back to notifying everyone it's complete, recording our documents, and ensuring the maintenance of the journal per state law. All right, now I want to talk about some highlights from Agents National's Ron COVID-19 Bulletin highlights. One, it's just for a short period of time, so please be aware of that. Unless, for example, you're in Florida or Texas where we've already provided bulletins, those are still ongoing. Things that we're going to require, similar to Fannie and Freddie, consent to the Ron. An important step also is making sure your closing instructions specifically state you can do a Ron transaction. If they don't, we need you to send them back to the lender to say, hey, I need this to specifically state that I may do RON. We have approved 4 RON vendor platforms as of right now. If you have a company that you think we should add to this list, please send it to your underwriting counsel and we will get together and look at that company and see what we think. You have to have a notary commission to do a RON. It's not just a notary, we've got to have the special add-on of the RON. For right now, our signer must be located in the United States, or you have to contact Candy, Cheryl, myself, Mickey, or Kevin to get special approval. For right now, the signer citizenship, it has to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. Again, we have to have the county acceptance of RON, and we are limiting the amount to automatically do a RON with your over limit approval. If you have an over limit where you're going to be using RON, we need you to put that in the notes section on your over limit request and let us know that specifically so we can have a conversation. Okay, so some key takeaways as we're in our last 4 minutes. Pick your key people and your notaries immediately. Everyone's trying to sign up for this right now. Go ahead and get them signed up. Even if you're not ready to do a RON transaction tomorrow, you've at least got the capabilities. Choose a tech provider again and move quickly. Even if, and this is Fannie and Freddie do now too, so even if your state hasn't required multi-factor authorization, we do. We've seen orders coming down from North Carolina, New York, Iowa, saying FaceTime's okay. Well, it's not. It's not with us and it's not with Fannie and Freddie. So there you go. Consents must be gathered, lender instructions. And our final point, if RON isn't for you, if it's not for your company, if you're completely uncomfortable, nothing says you have to do this. So we're going to have a session tomorrow where we actually talk about ideas that we can do to keep our company safe during the COVID-19 outbreak. We really hope that you join us to talk about different options, because again, this is all new and we all want to be safe. How do we do that? How can we work together? What are ideas we can all share during this crisis? All right, we're still in the business of providing peace of mind. If we do RON the right way, we're gonna have peace of mind, you're gonna have peace of mind, and we're all gonna feel better at the end of the day. And with that, thank you for being an AGENTS National Agent. These are the contact information for your local underwriting counsel.
And the registration for tomorrow's webinar was in the same email link as the one for today. So if you missed it, it was just the second one. Also, the handouts for today is also a link in that email. So if you couldn't find the handouts, that's where they're located. Any specific questions, come to any of us directly. And with that, I want to thank Elizabeth for her time. This will be recorded in case somebody in your office was not able to view it. We will have a recording available. But thank you and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you.